Welcome to the Refugee Portal Podcast, recorded at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. My name is Tarek.
And I'm Yusuf. The Refugee Portal Podcast interviews, shares, and learns from the stories of refugees, as well as the perspective of academics, humanitarian workers, members of government, and other stakeholders.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the interviewees and do not necessarily reflect those of the Refugee Portal Podcast or its hosts. All right, let's get right into it.
Our interview today is with Rabbi Philip Bregman, Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Sholom and the current Rabbi of Hillel House UBC. He received his BA from the University of Toronto and his rabbinic ordination from Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. Rabbi Bregman started his activist journey in high school, where he founded a chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The SCLC is an African-American civil rights organization which is closely associated with its first president, civil rights leader, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who was later assassinated for his nonviolent work of peace and equality. His most treasured possession is actually a letter from the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. thanking him for his support and work. Beginning in 1980, he led Temple Sholom of Vancouver as their senior rabbi. He raised the congregation there from 70 to 700 families during his tenure. Throughout his role as the spiritual leader of the congregation, he has inspired and touched the hearts of many people in Vancouver and around the world. He has been a longtime friend and passionate advocate of Hillel International, which is a Jewish campus organization. Hillel is represented at more than 550 colleges and communities throughout North America and globally, including 30 communities in the former Soviet Union, 9 in Israel, and 5 in South America. Rabbi Bregman is a leader in Jewish education, young adult initiatives, fostering relationships within the Jewish community, and interfaith dialogue. Our conversation with him today looks at how the Jewish community is supporting refugees locally and internationally. We discuss work done by the Joint Distribution Committee, which is a Jewish relief organization based in New York City and founded in 1914. We learn about the founding of Agahoze Shalom Youth Village, which is a home for orphans of the genocide as well as from AIDS in Rwanda. We look at work done by Jewish organizations around the world, including in countries such as Rwanda, Bosnia, Vietnam, the former USSR countries, and Ethiopia. We speak with him about how his successor at Temple Sholom, Rabbi Dan Moskowitz, and the Jewish community in Vancouver are helping Syrian refugees. And lastly, we discuss how he is a key supporter of Taste of Coexistence, which sees 2 restaurants, one operated by a Palestinian and one by an Israeli, come together to share with the public what they have in common, as well as meals from both their restaurants. Aleph and Chickpea. They see bringing people together to break bread as a way to build friendship and community. In 2020, the Taste of Coexistence will be held on April 5th at Heritage Hall in Vancouver.
Okay, welcome to the Refugee Portal Podcast. Rabbi Bregman, we've actually been friends for over 10 years. We met at the mayor of Vancouver at that time, Gregor Robertson, had a council, a faith-based council, to have a consultation with faith-based groups about ending homelessness in Vancouver.
Right.
And that's how we connected. That's how we got to know each other. Then over the years, we participated in a number of interfaith gatherings. One after the Quebec shootings in 2017, and then the New Zealand attacks, the memorials, and then for the Jewish community, were a number of attacks in the United States. So we tend to see each other on very serious kind of circumstances, but we become friends. Our communities have become friends, and even with the relationship, you're the Rabbi Emeritus from Temple Sholom, and through working with you, you helped facilitated a youth exchange, having a Q&A for the elderly of the Jewish community about Muslims and Islam, and then also were Muslims from the congregation from the El Jamia Mosque, Vancouver, which is the oldest mosque in British Columbia, to come and visit services on Saturday at Temple Sholom. And then the congregation who would have liked to come to the West 8th Mosque came for our Friday prayers. So it was an amazing exchange where a lot of misconceptions were dispelled. A lot of issues that I think Muslims may have had, or Jewish people may have had about each other, just by getting together, breaking bread, dispelled much of that misconception. So that's a long intro, but that was kind of the gist, more or less, of our relationship over this last number of years.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now, Rabbi Bregman, this is the Refugee Portal podcast, and we've intersected on a number of these issues. And so let's start off with basically an introduction to yourself, kind of your background in the community with Temple Sholom and the community work that you've done locally in Vancouver, and then we can expand on that.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for inviting me here to be with you today. I'm an old guy, I guess relatively speaking, well, certainly older than everybody else in this room. I'm 71. I was born in a small town outside of Toronto called Galt, Ontario. It doesn't exist anymore as Galt. It's now called Cambridge. And I lived there. My family was there for about the first 8 years of my life, and then we moved to Toronto. But those first 8 years of my life were basically some pleasant memories, but also, quite honestly, I dealt with a lot of anti-Semitism back in the 1950s. In school, people coming up to me and telling me that I was a Christ killer, and found myself constantly the target of a tremendous amount of hate and prejudice. Came to Toronto, and that was a very, very different type of experience, of course, because now I wasn't the only Jew in my class or in my school. There was still anti-Semitism, but I actually wasn't alone in it in terms of dealing with this or fighting with this. In any event, got connected with a synagogue in Toronto, and one of the things that is very, very key to the concepts within Judaism is this phrase tikkun olam, the repairing of the world. That we live in a world that is broken, that we each have a responsibility to try and repair what is broken. And with that in mind, through the encouragement of my rabbi, I became very much taken with the oppression that was taking place in the United States against and the nomenclature back in the 1960s and so were Negroes and then blacks and today African Americans.
The Civil Rights Movement.
The Civil Rights Movement, exactly. And, one of the things there was, continues to be at times, a very, very intense connection between the experiences of slavery with regard to the Jews in Egypt under the leadership of Moses and then of Pharaoh oppressing, and the experience of the African Americans coming to the United States and being bought and so on, continuing on to this very day where there is not complete and total equality to our with our neighbor to the south. By the way, there isn't complete and total equality in Canada as well. Let's not think that we're immune from this and that we're a perfect state. Far from it. And one of the things that actually comes up every year within the Jewish calendar is this festival of Passover, the liberation of the Jews from Egypt, back then known as either Bnei Israel or Hebrews. I looked it up. In 1862, there was a song published, known as a Negro spiritual, called "Let My People Go." I don't know if you're familiar with it. When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go.
Yes.
Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. And this was a very, very profound song and spiritual prayer within the black community. And of course it resonated within the Jewish community as well, because they're using that example of slavery back in thousands of years ago in Egypt. It made a connection. Well, the long and short of it is, I ended up, when I was in high school, starting a chapter of something called the SCLC, which stands for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Now, what's a Jewish boy doing with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference? It was the main organization by my major hero in life, the late Martin Luther King Jr. That was his organization. That's where he led the civil rights nonviolent movement. And I started a chapter of the SCLC in high school. And spent many hours walking and sitting outside of the American consulate in University Avenue in Toronto, protesting for civil rights.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I guess of all the pieces of paper that I might have up on my wall and degrees or whatever, the most important and to me significant is a personal letter of thanks from the late Martin Luther King to this young high school kid.
A personal letter
from
Martin
Luther King. Yeah. And so it made sense. I mean, these people were suffering, and I was really feeling their pain. And so the very famous statement by King so resonated within me: no man is free until all are free. No man is free until all are free. So that is something that very much shaped a great deal of who I was and possibly who I would become. So I finish high school, I go to University of Toronto, and I get my bachelor's degree, and then I'm off to Rabbinical College, 5 years, first in Jerusalem, and then
What made you decide to go to Rabbinical College, to take the calling to a spiritual occupation?
It's funny. You say the word calling. That's generally not a phrase within Judaism.
Okay.
I'm telling you.
Okay.
However, having said that, we of course we have a joke for everything, and the question is, did you receive the calling? And the answer was yes, and it was a collect call. Okay. I was very much influenced by my own rabbi, the late Rabbi Gunther Plaut of Toronto, who was very much involved in human rights and civil rights, having escaped Nazi Germany, came to Canada and so on. And so he was a major influence. And I took a look around. I had been involved in public speaking from a very, very young age, back in the days of Galt and everything. And I thought, what do I want to do? And I thought about medicine, but then I said, I keep on fainting when I see blood. Probably not a good a choice. I thought about law for a moment and thought, can I really defend somebody that I feel is guilty? And
the ethics.
Yeah, and so on. And so it seemed that these things came together philosophically, psychologically, ego-wise, and everything else. To look at the rabbi, and he gets up there every week, and he has a whole audience, a congregation. I said, this looks good. This looks good. And thought, okay, I think I want to try and do this. And so I applied and got in, and upon my ordination in 1975, I knew that I really didn't have enough of a background vis-a-vis dealing with psychological issues of people coming and so on. So I decided, I went back to my alma mater, University of Toronto, and did an MSW. Most of the coursework was just totally useless. But in the second year, I had a fabulous placement in Toronto, a Jewish family and child service with really unbelievable individuals, Jews and non-Jews, working there as therapists and so on. And that's where I really learned about the concept of out-of-the-box thinking. They were doing things, if there were drugs on the street and everything, they weren't expecting young people to come to our office. So they set up a trailer in Yorkville, which was the area where all of the drugs were taking place. And they took themselves to the place and got onto the street, and in a real and that had a profound effect on me as well. Ultimately, I said, okay, I'm going to put all of this together. I'm going to start congregational life. and I chose to. In within Judaism, we're not sent anywhere. It's a relationship where both the rabbi and the congregation have to decide where you want to go. And I saw there was an opening as an assistant rabbi in a place called New Rochelle, New York, in Westchester County, just north of New York City. New Rochelle is famous if you're a TV buff because it's where the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Okay, Mary Tyler Moore.
Exactly. Yeah. In New Rochelle, and it was a very large suburban congregation, and I stayed there for 3 years as the assistant rabbi. And
how did you like being in the U.S. versus the
well,
Canada?
At that point, it was interesting. I found it a little strange, but okay, and not like what it was today. You know, it in no way, shape, or form.
You mean the kind of anti-Semitism and bigotry and Islamophobia?
Well, I'm talking about just the whole
There's a lot of right-wing trends that seem to be very dangerous.
Yeah, they were there, but they were more under the surface than they are today. United States is continues to be an interesting place. They think they're the greatest nation in the world, and they act as if they're the greatest nation in the world. And as I say, it was interesting. But when an opportunity came for me to come back to Canada, I thought, gee, let's take a look at that. At this point, I had now met my wife, who was a New Yorker and was in business and just an executive. Was every month she was rising further, major corporation. And I said, well, if you want, we'll stay here. And she said, no, you know what? I probably had enough of corporate life right now. Let's try something new. I said, okay. You ever heard of a place called Vancouver? And she said, yes. Have you ever heard of a place called Vancouver? I said, I'm from Toronto. Of course not. Nothing exists outside of Toronto.
Exactly.
Okay. But let's go. It's a bunch of hippies. Let's go. Anyway, we came out for an interview in May of 1980, and it's what I call a sucker weekend.
Yeah,
the sun was shining, and the people were sailing, and you could still see some snow on grouse and everything, and
picturesque.
And and I told people, I said, "Wow, this is unbelievable." I'm just wondering here, do I need air conditioning if I look? Oh no, you never need air conditioning. Okay. So I remember when they started lying right off the bat. Anyway, we came out here for a 2-year adventure. I came out to the congregation Temple Sholom, which in 1980 was 65 families. And we had a very small building that had recently been purchased about a year or two before I got there on West 10th. It was an old Masonic lodge and on 2 stories. And that's where I began with Temple Sholom. And then comes January 25th, 1985, and I get a call at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and it's from the fire chief, and he said, Rabbi, I'm going to tell you that your synagogue is fully engulfed. We have a 3-alarm fire. It looks as if it was a bomb. And ran there, and I got the president and the past president of the congregation came, and the whole place is, the smoke is still, there, and the whole building had been basically demolished, and we ran into the building, and the firemen are yelling, "Where are you going? You're crazy!" You're running, because we had to get to the 2nd floor, which is where our sanctuary was, and we ran, and the outside of the ark had very, very serious damage, and we opened up, and the Torahs, the sacred scrolls, were still intact, smoke damaged.
Yes.
Now, we had a couple of Torahs on the 1st floor in a portable ark, totally destroyed.
Yes.
It turns out we had received word weeks earlier, somebody tried to light a Molotov cocktail in our building weeks earlier. And so we immediately said, okay, we've got to start putting up iron grating on our windows on the first floor. We had finished 95% of the job. The rest of the job was going to be finished that morning when the individual struck in the one of two windows that had yet been, they found the Molotov cocktail inside. Okay. Fortunately, no one was injured. I remember the next day, we are now moving services to the Jewish Community Center at 41st and Oak, and the first people to arrive was the mayor of Vancouver and his wife, Mike Harcourt.
Yeah.
And Mike and I had become friendly and so on, and he was beside himself. He was so furious that this had happened to his synagogue in his city. That's how he understood it. Okay, he said, Philip, I know it's yours. I said, no. He said, it's my synagogue because it's part of Vancouver, and I can't believe that this has happened under my watch. And he later on, he and Becky made the first contribution to the rebuilding of Temple Sholom, and so on. So we were about 3 years in the making until we found a piece of property on Oak Street around 56th, 55th, and we ultimately built and moved in 1988. Since that time, I mean, I've been subjected to all sorts of hate mail, death threats.
Even our guest previously, Tony McCauley, I think he did an anti-Semitic attack on your synagogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he actually brought that up yesterday.
Yeah. We so here we are building a new synagogue with bulletproof windows and security and so on, and it was a reality that unfortunately I had to live with.
And what's amazing is full circle, years later, he comes back to Temple Sholom as a speaker, as a former white supremacist, racist, to make amends.
Exactly. Now, I want to get back to when I came to Temple Sholom, by the way, came to Temple Sholom in 1980, and one of the reasons that my wife and I chose to come here, it was a small congregation. It was very small at the time. It was 65 families. It was a challenge. Would I be able to grow the congregation? Which fortunately my wife and I were able to do, because when I retired 33 years later, we were 700 families.
Wow,
and but it was the people and the commitment that they had, and one of the proudest things that they talked about was their sponsorship of Vietnamese boat people.
During the Vietnam War?
Yes. No, this is afterwards. This is in the 1970s where, after the war, refugees were out on the water, and they were in these boats, and countries would not let them in, by and large. They didn't want to deal with these refugees.
Yes.
Our synagogue brought in a couple of families, and anybody who thinks that we should not accept refugees, well, first of all, the reality is unless you're Aboriginal,
yes,
we're all
refugees.
We're all immigrants, and we're all basically refugees.
Yes.
But if you take a look at the economics of it, this country benefits so much by having individuals come in and lend their talent and their energy and their drive. And from these families that we have brought in today, I think we brought in about, the family congregation brought in about 4 or 5 individuals. Now they number in the hundreds. Their businesses are multiple. They have established themselves here. They contribute to the economy in a phenomenal way, and to the culture, and to the whole aspect of who we are in Canada.
And you took that leadership to make that decision on behalf of your congregation. We're going to do this.
Well, this was actually done before I came. And so I had that, so I've got these things swirling around in my head of experience. And so the next opportunity when there would be refugees, we jumped in hook, line, and sinker. And so our congregation has sponsored refugees from the former Soviet Union. We have sponsored refugees from
during the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union.
Exactly. And also from Sarajevo.
Yeah, during the Bosnian War.
And then most recently, and my successor, Rabbi Dan Moskowitz, continued that where the synagogue has and continues to sponsor Syrian refugees.
And what does this sponsorship entail? Like when Temple Sholom sponsors a refugee, what happens? What does that mean?
Sure. Now, the rules change over time with regard to immigration in Canada and so on. First of all, people need to be on a list that Canada looks at and changes probably weekly as to who is considered a refugee and who is not. Okay? So you really need Canada to step up and say, yeah, these people, because they will be able to come to a different line than people who are just waiting to immigrate to Canada. Okay. Now, having said that, you need to have the financial backing whereby you are going to be able to support these individuals for at least a year. So
the temple would put themselves up and say, hey, we're responsible for these folks to get them up and running for a year.
We would go out and we would have a fundraiser within the synagogue, going back years, okay, what do we need to raise? Well, we need to raise $20,000, and then it was we need to raise $50,000, or now we need to raise $60,000 or $70,000, and so on.
And then cover all the expenses for these
all
families.
of the expenses, and make sure. And then we're also covering, certainly when they first get here, any medical needs that they may have. So, of course, we'll have money for that, but we also then go to doctors and dentists in the community and say, hi, we're going to give you the opportunity to perform a mitzvah, which is a commanded good deed.
Yeah.
I don't say, would you like to? I say, we're going to give you the opportunity to perform this mitzvah. And, the person's going to look at me and say,
an
no.
offer you can't refuse.
Exactly. And the doctor, the dentist would say, okay, how much do you want? I said, I don't want your money. He said, well, that's a first, Rabbi. He said, well, I don't want your money now, but
to clarify a bit.
Yeah. What do you need? I need you to take on this family as patients. And
so in addition to food, shelter, clothing, the medical support from dental, medical, within the community.
Legal, whatever they need. Yeah. And at the same time, we have people within the synagogue who are going to commit volunteer hours, especially at the beginning, where these individuals they're going to need to be chauffeured from place to place. They're going to need to go and get a social insurance card. They're going to have to apply for medical. And then we have to get if they're children, we need to help them get integrated into a school and a community and so on.
So countless volunteer hours for the community.
To establish routes and get their bearings and get set up. Right?
Now, if they're Jewish, the people who are coming in, okay, so we've got the Jewish community that we're going to then, like a big blanket, wrap them in and so on. And for many of these individuals, this is so strange. They're not used to that. They're not used to the people reaching out. They're not used to people showing up at their door with food and toys
and smiles
and smiles and love. And if they're not Jewish, then we need to find out what's the community that you can most closely associate with, and we'll then make the connection between them. We'll still be involved, but we need that other community to be there to give them this cultural landscape of feeling, oh my God, I have traveled thousands and thousands of miles or kilometers or whatever it is. I haven't landed on the moon. They're speaking my language. They're worshiping somewhat similar to what I am used to. What do they need? What do they need? They need something for Christmas, or they need something. Are they going to be dealing with Ramadan? Are they going to be dealing with Easter? What are they going to be doing? So it becomes
a cultural sensitivity, a religious sensitivity to their needs.
Right, and we need to full on blast find out what's out there and who we can best
And did you find the response within the congregation, was it wholly positive?
Absolutely. I mean, we had more volunteers, and then, by the way, we would also then find housing for the individuals. So we would go and set up, and usually it would be a 2-3 bedroom apartment. We would assume the rent and everything, but then we would also furnish it.
Fantastic.
So that when the people came in, the beds were there, the linen were there, the dishes and everything. And we would also, though, we would provide not just the bare essentials, make it look like home, but we also wanted to make sure that there was money available so that they could go and make it their own. Not only from what they're bringing, but, you need to, we're going to help you, with a basic first shop of food. But now, tell me what you like. So there's a lot of listening. And then we have to source out where to get this food or where to get that food, or, and sometimes it's, like, it's one thing if you're going to Safeway, you're going to the kosher butcher, but if we are dealing with individuals coming from other culture, it's going to Jasmine on Main Street.
And for the halal meat there.
Exactly. And it's learning what about them, and they are so appreciative that we're doing this, and it's with the Vietnamese boat people, they would say to us many times, "Why are you doing this?" Because we were once in those boats trying to escape, and no one let us in. We know what it's like.
After World War II, after the Holocaust.
Yeah. So we know what it's like. We know what it's like to be thrown out of a country, and over the last 1,000 years. So we know what it's like. Anyway, so these various opportunities, experiences, really were very, 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 very powerful.
Well, and you were saying from Yugoslavia during the Bosnian time and the former Soviet Union.
Yes.
And in that context, because obviously the folks from Vietnam have a different requirement. The folks from the former Soviet Union have a different requirement. Yugoslavia, and then obviously the Syrian refugees. Now, with the Syrian refugees, based on your understanding of the congregation's support for the Syrian refugees, what was how many families were brought, or how many individuals were brought?
There were, I believe, 2 families that are here now, and there's a third one in the in the pipeline.
Excellent.
Waiting.
And how is that with obviously the religious and cultural thing in terms of them being welcomed by the Jewish community and the Jewish community with the Muslim community?
It has worked out very, very well. We also had a tremendous advantage in the sense that we are connected with a family where the husband is a Kurd and the wife is a Russian Jew.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Okay?
That's an amazing combination.
It is. And this individual's grandchildren go to the same school that my grandchildren go to, Talmud Torah. And so that has proved a tremendous help for us to learn, because we're learning on the fly about what, we need to do the sensitivities. And the other thing, it's one thing with regard to the Soviet Union, but when we're bringing people in from Bosnia and we're bringing people in from war-torn Syria, we're dealing with another dynamic, and that is the trauma that they experienced.
So like mental illnesses like depression and
PTSD
nightmares.
and absolutely.
Well, yesterday we were actually hearing from a panel of refugees, and what they were telling us was that not only is each instance different. So Syria, Yemen, Somalia. It's even within those countries, there's differences. If you're a refugee who was at one point a middle-class family versus someone who was a farmer, your needs, your challenges, and your experiences are going to be different. And they brought up the need for psychological appraisal and support and differentiating. It's not just one word. It's not just refugee, and that's who you are.
Yeah.
They were making a huge point that if you don't differentiate and help people based upon their actual lived experience, then you're going to be doing them a disservice and perhaps even a harm.
Yeah. And you know, to a certain extent, we have that experience within our own community of dealing with survivors of the Holocaust. You can't lump them all together in the sense that because they all went through different experiences. Maybe if you even within the same concentration camp, but some were in different camps. Some were hiding, were being hidden by righteous Gentiles and
like
so on.
Oscar Schindler. And
Exactly. Different, all these various different experiences. So you need to listen to them and listen to what they're saying and how they say it, and then pick up on what you think they might need, not by guessing and not by assuming, but by doing what we call active listening, really listening and digging deep into what is going on here. And at the same time, being aware that individuals are coming not necessarily from westernized countries. Okay?
they don't understand things the way we do.
For example, when Israel in 91 did an airlift of the majority of Jews left in Ethiopia.
Right.
It was a phenomenal thing. It was in I think May of 1991. 35 aircraft were sent, and what they did was, and this was all done without the general population even knowing it. So the main
for security reasons.
For security reasons. So the main commercial airline of Israel is El Al. They recalled all of their fleet, which wasn't that many, and they painted over
the sign
so you didn't see the Star of David.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't see the Hebrew.
Yeah.
And then they took out the seats on these jumbo jets.
Wow.
Because they were going to airlift just under 15,000 people in 36 hours. So they packed people into planes.
Yes.
Okay, and then they had to and people. I remember I had congregants saying, I'm sitting somewhere in Paris, and I'm supposed to be flying El Al from Paris to Tel Aviv, and
no
all
plane.
of a sudden and he says, no, we're now on a Delta airline. We're now on a this airline. What's
Delta?
And we go up. What's the matter? He said we were having mechanical problems, and while that was going on, the planes were flying back and forth under the radar, literally. And they came and they airlifted, and they had incubators because 2 babies were born en route.
Wow.
And we knew, and so the doctors were being delivered on the plane. And so here you get these people that land now in Israel, okay? They're not coming from the 19th century into the 20th century. I think some of them were coming from the 15th or 16th century. They had never seen indoor toilets. They had never seen a plane or been in a plane. Can you imagine somebody telling you, I've got to get into this can, and somehow this thing is going to take off,
Wow.
and hours later, and these Jews in Ethiopia didn't know that any Jews existed outside of Ethiopia.
Wow.
And now they arrive in one of the most modern, technological savvy countries in the world without a clue as to what to do. And Israel very quickly had to learn that they had to have people there to show them what a stove was.
Wow. So were there major challenges in integrating into the country? Yeah.
Huge. And it took quite a while. It took quite a while.
That's almost 30 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
29 coming
Yeah,
up.
19.
30th,
Yeah.
coming up on the 30th.
And so, again, that was an unbelievable experience that took place, and it had a profound effect. Now let's go back to Ethiopia, because there's a major organization within the Jewish community called the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee.
Yeah.
Established in 1914
Yeah.
for the welfare of the Jewish people around the world.
Right.
And you were telling me there's an individual who's regarded as the Mother Teresa of the Jewish community for the work that they've done.
Exactly. So the work originally was trying to rescue Jews from anti-Semitic countries
All over the world.
But primarily in terms of Europe and so on. Today, most of their work has nothing to do with Jews, but they still do it. Okay. So there's this young Jewish doctor by the name of Rick Hodes, educated in the United States and everything, a very observant Jew. And he ends up in Addis Ababa, because that's where he wants to do his work. He's under the sponsorship of the Joint Distribution Committee. He is sponsored. He's adopted, I don't know how many Ethiopian children himself. He's a single guy. And he is dealing, he is really sort of Judaism's Mother Teresa. He's there on the ground.
In the 1980s or 70s he started?
Yes.
This is during, do you remember the Sally Struthers infomercial about starving children in Africa and when you need a helping hand?
Right.
It was the Ethiopian famine, actually.
Yeah, it showed the kids with the distended bellies.
Exactly.
So during that time, that's when he went.
And he went over and he saw that there were all sorts of congenital diseases. And there was no possibility of these people were going to survive. And so he opened up a clinic. And more importantly, he then started making connections with doctors around the world. Will you come here for a month? Will you come here for 2 months? And in one particular situation, there was an individual whose spine was like this, and unless this individual was going to get major surgery, he would die because it would just completely and totally cut off the airwaves and so on. And what was done ultimately through the generosity of specific family here in Vancouver, in connection with UBC's medical department and VGH's medical department, the young man was airlifted and the surgery was done here and the post-operative was here, and then months and months of recuperation at this family's house. And Rick had identified it. This family somehow heard about it, and this one particular individual by the name of Gary Siegel stepped up and said, "That's now my kid."
Wow.
And
brought him.
And brought him.
Wow.
And just took care of all of the medical bills and the months and months and so on. And that young man has now gone back into Ethiopia and is now doing phenomenal work and helping to identify other things and so on. So that organization is going and this is completely and totally under the sponsorship of the Joint Distribution Committee. Mm-hmm. Now, I gotta let me also tell you, if I might, there's an organization, my favorite organization in Israel is something called Save a Child's Heart. And Save a Child's Heart, let's see, did I put in, 1996. A bunch of doctors, starting primarily with cardiologists in Israel, and said, we've got to now expand our horizons, and we need to be helping young children and babies with congenital heart issues. And so they opened up with donations, starting first in Israel and now going themselves into African countries. Okay, the majority of the individuals, I mean, these are all non-Jewish children that are being either brought to Israel, or the doctor will go to the country where the child lives. The only problem is with these operations. The operation is one thing. It's the post-operative care.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for the recovery.
It's huge.
Yeah, and in too many of the countries, it's not there. So they could do the operation, but the child would die So in those instances, they simply airlift the child and usually the mother to Israel, take care of them, and so on. And this is going on. It doesn't get a lot of publicity, of course, because people don't like good stories. They don't like good
Sure.
news and so on. But this is happening every single day.
Every single day.
Every single day, there are Palestinians coming into Israel under the watchful eye both of the army and the government. Technically, they're in the country illegally. No one cares. They're coming in. They're having the operations. They're having the post-operative care. And then when they think they're okay, then Israel will get them back to the country that
And this is done by a private organization?
This is done by Save a Child's Heart.
Yeah.
Yes. And that was founded by who?
I don't know the actual, his name escapes me. There's a couple of doctors in Israel who started this.
Right.
And obviously, I think when people look at countries, just like the term refugee, people tend to view refugees all in the same way, where there's so many nuances and differences. As Yusuf was saying, there are some from middle-class families, some that were farmers, and same in Israel and Palestine. People are of different viewpoints. Like some are of a very kind of cooperative and everyone come together in peace and harmony and live together. And then there are others that don't want to even talk to each other. And so, obviously, in this whole kind of experience with refugees, with the Palestinian refugees in Jordan and Lebanon and that sort of thing. So, there are refugees about, I would say, according to the UNHCR, 70 million refugees around the world today. And they're projecting, due to climate change, war, many factors, that this number is going to increase in 9 years to 300 million. So it's going to keep increasing. And then again, every country is different. Every nuance is different. Every family, every individual is different. And so by helping refugees to self-determine, and the purpose of this podcast is to look at solutions like yourself, you've committed to being a Canadian Jew. I was born actually not far from the city of your birth. I was born in Oakville, Ontario.
Really?
So
I was born in Sudbury.
Really?
Yeah.
So
we're all a bunch
Ontario
of
boys.
we've all escaped Ontario.
So we're all Canadians.
Yes.
And we have our religious beliefs.
Right.
But as Canadians, this humanity that we're connected to serve humanity and help people.
Exactly.
And so I think with the great work that you've done over the years, locally and abroad, looking at these solutions, and I'm looking at.
Well, I'd like to tell you an interesting story. So a couple of years ago, a member of the Jewish community came to me and said, I'd like you to put on a program that is going to tackle and get rid of anti-Semitism. And I said to the individual, okay, I will also cure cancer and do global warming at the same time. What do you think? She said, whatever. Okay, good.
Wow.
That's a pretty...
Okay.
She believed.
So at the same time that I've been told by a member of the community, have some type of program that will deal with. So I gave the program. This was when I was executive director of Hillel, the Jewish student organization on 7 different campuses in the Lower Mainland and in Victoria. I gave this to my managing director, Jordana Shani, and another individual by the name of Rebecca Recant. And Rebecca, I was able to steal from New York, from the Anti-Defamation League. She had a boyfriend here. It was nice. She came, and it was great, and so on. So I went to Jordana, and I went to Becca, and I said, I want you guys to come up with a program that deals with racism, okay? And just think as far out of the box as you can. Okay. We have this word in Yiddish, beshert. It's fate, that something should happen. Okay. While I tell them their thinking and everything else. One day, this student walks into Hillel, tall, good-looking young man, black, and says, "Is Rebecca here?" I said, "No, she's out for coffee. She's coming back, but stay here, cookies and everything else." I said, "May I ask you how you know Rebecca?" She says, "Well, I actually don't know Rebecca, but I know her dad." I said, "You know Rebecca's dad?" "Oh, Rebecca's dad, Will Recant, is the executive vice president of the Joint Distribution Committee." And I said, "Okay, I'm trying to pick up the accent. Help me. Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Rwanda." Uh-huh. And if you excuse my directness, are you an orphan of the genocide? Yes. And did you grow up in the village that Will Recant built? Yes. After the genocide, in which 1 million individuals were slaughtered, we have to use that word because
It was brutal.
machetes.
Yeah.
100,000 a day. Okay, so
100,000 a day were being slaughtered.
At the highest levels.
Yeah. So after this unbelievable slaughter, the Joint Distribution Committee met with some individuals from Rwanda and said, "What do you need?" And they said, "We don't know what to do with our children. We don't know what to do with our orphans." And they said, "What did you guys do? What did Israel do at the end of the Holocaust?" And at that point, the Joint Distribution Committee said to the Rwandans, "Here's your airline ticket. We're going to Israel. We're going to show you." So they go to Israel and they come to this small little community, and it's a village called Yamin Ord, O-R-D-E. Now, Yamin means strength. Ord is the name of an individual British officer by the name of Ord Wingate, who helped out tremendously in the early days of Israel and so on. And so they named this village after him, and it was specifically a village for orphans of the Holocaust. Okay? Now we're many, many years later, and he says, okay, so the village today doesn't have any orphans of the Holocaust, but is used as a youth village for those who come from homes that are financially, emotionally in distress. And so the village consists of Jews, Muslims, Christians, living and coordinating, and the Rwandans take a look at this and said, "This is exactly what we need." He said, "Okay." He said, so they said to Will Recant, "So come to Rwanda and look around, and we'll take you up in a helicopter and spot, if you see some land that you think you want to, cultivate, and let us know." And Will finds the territory. He says, "This would be good here." And the Rwandans said, "Okay, we'll take it away from the owners." And he says, No. We're not doing that. You put me in touch with the owners. We're going to buy the land. I don't want anybody coming back and saying anything was expropriate. We're going to buy the land. The Joint Distribution Committee is going to buy the land. And they did. And they bought acres and acres, not too far outside of the capital of Rwanda, which is Kigali. And so they built this phenomenal village, and they called it Agahoza Sholom. The word Agahoza is a Rwandan word for tears. And this is where orphans came, and they grew up in this village. And this young man who was a student at UBC grew up there. And he remembers playing basketball with Will Recant in the village.
The founder.
Yeah. And he said, "I found out that his daughter is working here, and I want to have a connection." At that point, Rebecca walks in. I make the introduction. I don't have to tell you about the tears and everything else. And then it hits them. Jordana, and Becca. Okay, we're going to have a program called Project Tikkun. We're going to take 5 Jews and 15 non-Jews, and we're going to study for a year various aspects of racism, hatred, and genocide around the world.
And what does tikkun mean?
Repair.
Repair.
So Project Tikkun means a repair. And we bring in, of course, individuals of the Holocaust, but we bring in individuals from Rwanda. We bring in Aboriginals. They put a phenomenal program together, and for 8 months, twice a month, these students would come to Hillel and would spend a Sunday afternoon, evening, learning, processing, and everything else. And then at the end of this process, we're off to a trip, first to Rwanda and then to Israel. And when we came into Rwanda, we were treated like the biggest heroes. And Will joined us for the trip, of course. Will Recant, who's Becca's dad. I mean, he walks into that place, and it's like...
it's like Moses.
Yeah, Moses.
Yeah.
Okay, coming in, and so it was a phenomenal experience. And we worked in the village and with the children and everything else. And then we went to Israel, and we went to Yamin Ord, and we took people through it, and it was very interesting. They met with Palestinians, they met with Israelis, we wanted to show the good, the bad, the ugly. We weren't there to do propaganda or anything else. Get to see. We stayed at one of my favorite places, which is the YMCA right across from the King David Hotel, which is a Palestinian-run YMCA, but it's a great location. Lovely. People were phenomenal, and you need kosher food, we'll give you kosher food.
Was it fun to stay at the YMCA?
It was. Yeah, we sang and everything, and it was. And on this trip, we had Muslims, we had Jews, we had Baha'i, we had Sikhs, Christians, a real multiplicity, and that was really a very, very important thing. And these kids have now come back, and each one of them is doing something phenomenal in the world outside of their own little
community
bubble.
Or bubble, yeah.
Yeah. That's what we want to do. We expand that bubble.
And it seems like your personal mission from the times of the Civil Rights Movement and Martin Luther King, and the desire to be part of something that's going to help the oppressed, the people that are going through their difficulties wherever they are in the world, and make a difference locally, abroad, in your capacity. And I think, as Canadians growing up here, and we do have the context of our respective faiths, but it's what can we do in my personal ability right now? And so, just as a testament to the work that you've done over so many decades, much more than anything that I've done, to really contribute and to really be of service to humanity. And it's as we know, it's a thankless job, but it's a great feeling to know that, hey, maybe if somebody's life could be better because of the work that we do, it's powerful.
Precisely. Look, the expression goes, by the grace of God, I could be in that boat. I could be sitting in that refugee camp. I mean, if I have been placed here in this incredible country, okay, with all of its problems, okay, and believe me, we got problems, right?
Yeah.
Look at the rail lines and
even the native relations, the indigenous relations.
Right, but still one of the greatest countries in the world.
Absolutely.
Why have I been given this gift? I'm not special. I'm not better. I'm not, why? My only answer is that, and really, it without really sounding snappy, I mean, I've got to give back something because of the privilege that I have experienced. Yes, along with racism. Yes, along with, it hasn't been a walk in the park.
And some people could use racism as a way not to do that, like
exactly.
Prejudice, not to like
exactly
like the girl that we interviewed. She was called a terrorist, but she's giving sandwiches on the downtown east side with people that are putting needles in themselves as a 17-year-old girl, not using the negative to become negative.
Exactly.
So using the negative to become positive.
Exactly. And so let me just bring up to speed something that we've been doing and that we're going to continue to do with our two communities.
Yes.
Between the mosque and the synagogue.
Yes.
Okay. So a couple of years ago, actually about 2 years ago, we decided to have a program. We have a hot lunch program at Hillel, and we've been running this
on Wednesdays. Yeah.
Yeah, on Wednesdays, and we decided that we're going to, and again, the idea actually came from my daughter, Jordana Shani happens to be my daughter, married to Itamar Shani. Anyway, I'm talking about a different program, and somebody was having a taste of Palestine. Should we have a taste of Israel? She says, no. You should have a taste of coexistence. I said, okay, what the hell's that? And she said, do you remember I took you to a great restaurant on Powell Street? I said, yeah. I said, do you remember who owns it? I said, I can't remember. He said, his name is Haitham. He's Palestinian. Yes? Okay. Well, Itamar, her husband, my son-in-law, and Haitham met at the urging of Mohammed of Jasmine.
The halal meat shop on Main Street.
Because my son-in-law is the owner of Chickpea, which is right across the street.
On Main Street.
On Main Street.
I've eaten there. Fantastic. Great portions.
I've been there too.
Anyway,
I recommended it.
And it was Mohammed that said to Itamar, there's a young guy opening up a restaurant on Powell Street. He's Palestinian. You should meet him. And he said the same thing to Haitham. And they'll tell the stories of, all of the voices of their past coming, of families saying, don't you dare trust this Israeli. Don't you dare trust this Palestinian.
And there are these such entrenched views on both sides. Like this some have a positive and many have a negative view.
So fortunately, these two young men who traveled thousands of miles from their homes, Itamar grew up in Israel and Haitham grew up in Lebanon, in a refugee camp, were able to put the voices aside and deal with the new reality here in Canada, and they met. And they are the closest of individuals. They're both in the biz. They don't see themselves as competitors. They truly see themselves as brothers. So what was developed was a taste of coexistence, and one Wednesday the food would come in from Chickpea. The next week the food would come in from Aleph, A-L-E-P-H, and Haitham chose that because it's the first letter in the Arabic and the Hebrew and the Persian alphabet.
Yep.
His food is fantastic. I what am I going to say about Chickpea? Of course, the food is fantastic. And Haitham is veganish. It's vegetarian, of course, and we had these meals, and I'm putting this whole program together. And I'm realizing, I said, okay, guys, how much do you need for a meal? And they gave me a price, and I said, okay. And I think to myself, okay, that's absolutely fair, but it's more than the students will pay. So I needed to go out and raise money to subsidize this. So I started raising money. And I started, of course, within the Jewish community. People started throwing money at me. And then my daughter said, Abba, with the Hebrew for dad. Wow. Why are you just raising money in the Jewish community? And I went to the Muslim community. And I went to the Sikh community. And I went to the Catholic community, the Protestant community, and the Baha'i community. And money started coming in. People felt so good about this. And then we had one event here where the two restaurants came together, and we actually had the meal upstairs in the Grand Hall. We served over 1,100 meals that day for free.
Wow.
It was a freebie. And we did that at the end of one semester, and then we did it again the beginning of this year, and so on. And when it finished at the end of December this year, I said to the gang, why don't we try and take this on the road? What do you mean? Well, let's do a program off campus. Oh, by the way, and the people that came, thousands of people, students, administrators. By the way, President Ono threw money at me when I approached him.
The president of UBC.
The president of UBC. It was anything. If I can get Bregman away from me, I'll just give him some money. Go ahead. Here. What do you need? Here's the money. Go away. Anyway, so it's okay. And we thought, and I said, you know what? I want this to have sponsorship, and the most logical place to do would be my synagogue and your mosque. I phone up this guy by the name of Tarek, who's sitting here. I don't think I had all of the sentence out when he said, we're in.
We're
in. And so this event is happening April 5th, 3102 Main Street at Heritage Hall. There are going to be 3 different sittings. There's a fee for the meal. The restaurants are really discounting the price,
subsidized.
and they're doing the subsidy. They're not making any money here, but they want to do it, and that is going up, and it's called Taste of Coexistence. The banner says Taste of Coexistence. 2 chefs, 1 Palestinian, 1 Israeli. And we're opening it up to the community, though, the problem is that place only can seat about 150 people. We're having 3 different sittings,
Yeah.
and people will be able to, shortly, it'll be online, and people can register and pay and so on. But again, it's experience, and with each one of these lunches, it wasn't just the food. Haitham and Itamar would be present at each one of the lunches at Hillel and so on, and they would talk. They would talk about their experience. They would talk about their prejudice and how to overcome that, and what they had to do, and how they continue to be able to break down the stereotypical thinking. And they had to put aside the messages of their parents and family members back in Israel or Lebanon who are saying, don't. Okay? And so it's like a retraining. And so that's another program, and I am so grateful to the mosque. You said at the beginning, we get together. Unfortunately, we've been getting together not exclusively, but primarily at times of intense sadness, whether it's the massacre in Quebec City or the massacre in Pittsburgh and so on. And so here's an opportunity where we're getting together of a celebration on that April 5th of our communities coming together. And
you know what's powerful is by this exchange and breaking bread with one another, because we've done that at both places of worship. And I do recall one time Rabbi Dan Muskovitz, he hosted a forum, a Q&A with one of our scholars, Mufti Asim, and some of the conversation was getting some people had some certain views, some entrenched views, and Rabbi Dan had a great line. He says, we're not going to solve the problem of Israel and Palestine at this setting. That's what we can do in our capacity as human beings. We're here in Canada to meet one another, to work with one another, to help one another as neighbors here, because in our respective faiths, a neighbor has a right. A neighbor to have a right on your neighbor, regardless what their belief is, regardless of their background or their color. The neighbor has a right on us in both our religions. And so at the end of the day, there's so many big geopolitical things that whatever anyone's interpretation of who's right, who's wrong, the bottom line is, what can we do in our capacity for the greater good in our ability where we are right now? And you've done a testament to that over the decades of service to our community, and we're trying to do that to an extent, and even with this podcast. Like, you see the challenges in every country around the world,
right?
And you're like, what can we do? And to give a voice and to have a recording like this that people can listen to, that hey, communities are getting together, people are trying to solve these things in their different ways, and by this we can help change the world a little bit.
It takes, I guess at times, the word is courage, to take that step outside of your comfort zone to find out about someone else. Yusuf, as you know, I know your brother. Well, you got a number of brothers, but the guy who was here at the time, Ali, and his dear friend Salman, and I knew them when they were here at UBC through the chaplaincy, and so on. Fascinating that they took the step to apply to a certain contest that was being sponsored, I think, by Barclays
and Techstar. Yeah.
Yeah. And the winner gets to go to Israel to
Tel Aviv.
And
For the technology incubator.
The Techstar startup incubator was sponsored by Barclays, focusing on fintech. This one was in Tel Aviv.
Right.
Yeah, they were there for 3 months.
Right.
Months, yeah.
Right. And the fact that they would apply, the fact that they would say, okay, if not thinking that they were going to win, but if they did, my God, they're going to end up in Israel.
Yeah.
And I just you can speak to it, Ali, because he says it was a phenomenal experience. They loved it, and so on. And his experience at the in Jerusalem and so on. He was telling me where he was going up to the Temple Mount, and some Israeli policeman was yelling at him and said, "You can't go to it's only for Muslims." Ali said, "No?" And his guide said, "Yeah, he's a Muslim." He says, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, he's a Muslim." But again, it's breaking down barriers. It's taking that step and seeing, where can I learn? Where can I grow? Because people know that this is an international community in so many ways, and if that virus teaches us anything that's going on today.
The coronavirus.
Yes. There are no walls.
No. And it affects everybody the same way.
There are no passports.
Yeah.
There's no country, Val.
Yeah.
Right? And we got to come together. We've got to take those steps and challenge our own thinking at times. And not go to that default position when you're in a car and somebody cuts you off, and your first response is going to be that damn blank, 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 whatever it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Especially if the individual in that car does not look like you.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about this exact same thing yesterday. I fell off my bike, as I was telling you yesterday, and I was like, that's the least problem. If majority of the people in the world, I'm recreational, we're exercise, trying to lose some weight for an hour, going through Pacific Spirit Park, and I just took a tumble, and I got a little bit bloody, scraped up, a little bruised, and I was like, this is not that bad compared to other places. So in the context, like, even we've been in traffic incidents where it kind of gets under our skin, but in the context of what's happening around the world, it's nothing.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
the young lady we interviewed, Hiba, she was saying that because of her experience, she no longer gets stressed out about like tests or getting cut off in traffic or people just being jerks or stuff. It's just like because you see what it could be like.
Exactly.
You see how bad it could get, and if you survive that, you're like, what am I going to do to complain about such a small thing?
Yeah. Yep, it's an important thing. We would take individuals from the synagogue down to the downtown east side, and we did programs together also, handing out sandwiches and everything else. It wasn't for the purpose of taking the kids going there and saying, "Oh, look how great we are."
Yeah.
I want you to know what's happening in your city a few kilometers from where you're living. I want you to see the conditions. The very least we can do at this point is provide some type of nourishment, but it's not just the nourishment, it's coming from a person at the other end holding out a hand, okay? And with a statement, "I see you.
Yeah.
You're not invisible." One of the memories that I have seared into my head was when I was living in New York, outside New York. And one day my father-in-law, called me, and he was a stockbroker in New York City, and he said, "Come on in for dinner and everything else." And I said, "Okay, fine." So I take the train in from New Rochelle into Grand Central and so on, and I'm walking up Madison Avenue, and it happened to be in December. I think it was about the second week of December.
Very cold.
Okay. and Madison Avenue, very, very wealthy stores and everything. And I'm watching this scene, and I can't believe it. These stretch limousines are pulling up. Individuals are getting out of their limousine. As they're walking into the store, they literally had to walk over some homeless people sleeping on the street in front of the store. And I was like, what's going on here? And I stayed for about a half hour because I wanted to see, is anybody going to reach down and make contact with the person that they're stepping over, going into a store in which in all likelihood they are going to spend in a half hour 10, 20, or 100 times more money than this individual will ever see in 5 lifetimes.
Yeah.
No one stopped. It was if the people were not there. And I thought to myself, okay, before I become high and mighty and everything else, who do I not see? Who am I ignoring? Now, I'm aware of the fact that at a certain point, there has to be a cutoff. Your nervous system can only take so much stimuli, otherwise we go bananas. Okay, but most of us are very, very far from that. Okay, from that point of saying this is too much. Who are we not seeing? And how come? And how can we begin to see, quote, the other, whomever that is? In this case, individuals who are in refugee camps and literally as well as figuratively dying to come into our country. Okay?
Yes.
So there are wonderful organizations around that you can get involved in, mostly through faith communities.
Yes.
Okay? Whether you're a Muslim, you're a Christian, you're a Jew, you're a Sikh, you're a Buddhist, each one of us, each one of our faith communities has a place that you can go and hook up to. And if you're not of a faith community, you can find other places that you can, in fact, do things, whether it's with the Red Cross, whether it's with Doctors Without Borders, okay, in which you can lend a hand, okay? Or go down to the Gospel Mission and lend a hand. There are things we can do that I tell you, it's incredible medicine. It is, to relieve stress.
Yeah.
And what I love about Canada and Vancouver in particular, all the faith-based groups and all the groups that aren't even faith-based that have this heart to do this. Like the BCMA, I think last year was 75 families that the BCMA, the BC Muslim Association, sponsored. The United Church sponsored several families.
Right.
So most churches, synagogues, temples, they went all out. Exactly what you were saying about active listening, trying to provide for all these different needs for the people. And the humanity of it. In our family's background is from India, Pakistan, and there's an Urdu term, it's called insaniyat, this kind of humanitarian, this desire to help others. And it's an amazing city we live in. It's an amazing country we live in, that we come from all these different backgrounds, and the amount of people that want to give back and help people, whether it's the downtown east side, newcomers to the country. It's an amazing thing to witness and be proud that, hey, we're part of a country that is trying to do good locally and abroad.
Absolutely.
So, Rabbi, thank you very much for coming and sparing your time with us.
My pleasure. And last pitch, April 5th, Sunday, Taste the Coexistence at Heritage Hall on Main Street. The publicity is going to be out very shortly. Whether it's a lunch, early dinner, or an evening thing, bring your families, bring your children.
And the age-old thing, break bread with the quote-unquote other, and this is how communities come together.
Have some of the most fantastic food, ambience, and you get to listen to these two phenomenal individuals and chefs, brothers, colleagues, Hytham and Ithamar.
Again,
thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
If you have any questions related to the Refugee Portal podcast, are interested in sponsorships, interviews, or ideas, please feel free to get in touch with us at refugeeportal.org or email us at info@refugeeportal.org.